My father used to say this to me, and it was always in the context of work. You cannot be accountable for something that you're not responsible for. If I'm not responsible for your health or your relationship with somebody else, how can I be in charge of that? You can't just decide that your wife has to make your doctor's appointments.
Toxic people love to weaponize guilt against their victims. Today, LIsa Sonni and I talk about why guilt tripping is such a successful manipulative move. I have met people who are masterful at trying to control me in the relationship by using guilt. And I don't always know if they know that they're doing it, sometimes because they're just the perpetual victim. So life's always unfair. That means I'm unfair or I don't see them accurately. But it has been so difficult to not let that control and compel me. I see this with people that we work with too, that they have people, especially if their toxic partner, will then exploit this, like, you're hurting the kids, or you're making me worse, or this is why I do what I do. I cheat on you because whatever they'll say. So what's your experience with this? Is guilt a really great way to get you too?
So for me personally, it's wonderful. Like, it's just, that's the best way to do it for me. Even to this day, guilt gets to me, but I also see this really, really a lot with my clients. I'm constantly talking about all of the guilt that these abusers and exploitative, manipulative, narcissistic people put on to their victims. It works with a lot of people. And I see a wide range of things, and it depends, but like, after everything I've done for you, right? They want you to feel that they've had these efforts to sacrifice things and that you should be grateful. You're being ungrateful by leaving me after everything I've done for you. But what they've done for you, to you, is abuse you.
Or they want from you something they're not willing to actually give you. They want you to show up in a way with compassion and care as if you owe that to them. And yet, if you were to flip the table and ask them to step up in a similar way, they'd never think to do that. That's just not even on the cards. I'm astonished the number of times we fail to see that this is a one-sided relationship, that there is not that kind of care and concern for you. So why do you think it works so effectively? Because that's usually the case. It's not a reciprocal situation. There's nothing equal about this. Why is this so compelling for us?
It makes you feel like you've done something wrong, or that something is inherently wrong with you, that you've hurt them. And I think we just kind of internalize that. The way that they've made us feel responsible for them. If you do something wrong towards them, like leave, keep yourself safe, set any type of boundary, have any needs, wants, or desires, they want you to feel guilty so that you don't ask for more, so that you don't ask for your needs to be met, so that you stay. It preys on something inside you that makes it really hard.
I'm thinking of situations and scenarios that are not even necessarily with romantic partners. I don't know how many times I've had people that I know that I've deeply cared about have a scenario with their family that they somehow are the primary care provider, or the one who always deals with X, or the one who always has this meal or hosts this party, or whatever it is. They do this for the larger group of people, and as if they're the only one that can do it, as if it all rests upon them. And if they can't do it, then the whole thing will crumble and it will be all their fault. And yet when you stand back, you think, come on, nobody's irreplaceable, first of all. And the second is, there's lots of competent people here. It's just amazing to me that we feel so bad and feel so responsible for situations that other people have put themselves. Remember, nobody did this to this person. They put themselves into that situation. They don't have to have that party. They don't need to have that get together. The reason they need this sort of support is because they failed to do something that put them in that position, probably. I'm thinking of right now of somebody who caretakes for a family member. That family member has other people. They're the one that let their health run down. It's not this person's fault or responsibility. But yet, boy, does this keep us entrenched and trapped.
I actually have a client, on that health thing. Her partner has epilepsy. That's not his fault, but he doesn't take his medication. He doesn't take care of himself. He doesn't really follow what the doctor tells him to do. He ends up in the hospital, and she is the only person who can take care of him. His mother comes to try to help, and he's like, no, I need you. He has options, but he wants her to feel like she's the only one who really knows how to take care of him. That makes her feel responsible. So when she tries to leave, she feels like he's not going to make it without her. Then she feels guilty for abandoning him. But meanwhile, he's done this to himself. Not the epilepsy, but the way that he needs to be taken care of. And the fact that he's put himself in a position where nobody but his mother, or frankly, his hostage, basically, will take care of him because he's horrible to everyone else around him, that people walk away. Who do you think put him in that situation? And that's true of any of these situations. He's awful to you. You feel guilty for leaving. Meanwhile, he's choosing to be awful to you. And then you feel guilty for leaving a person that is inherently treating you terribly. You have the desire to just take care of yourself. You want to just choose you. You just want to not be abused. And that's something to feel guilty for in this context. It's crazy making to feel that way, but it's so true. I also see this, and you must see this, because if I ever make a video on this topic, people are like, yes, oh my God, why do they always say this? When you give them any piece of feedback, it's like, oh, so I'm a piece of shit? What's with that phrase? Do you hear them a lot?
Mm-hmm. We both know that's a form of Darvo, but it works so effectively because we know we're doing it out of a kind heart and a good space, and we want the relationship to be healthy. And so when given this constructive, whether it's a limit or feedback or whatever it is, this rebuttal and pushback that aligns us, then we want to defend against it because we know our intentions was never like that or around that. So yeah, it's really a great weapon. Here's another way I also see this play out though too. And I'm thinking of a client that I worked with years ago, had a special needs child. So she was already in a tremendously stressful situation, caretaking somebody. It was a catastrophic situation. But she had a partner who couldn't set his own alarm and wake himself up, and then needed her to not only get up and wake him, but make the coffee for him and make his lunch because he couldn't somehow do that for himself. This is a grown man not able to set his alarm, make his own coffee, and make his own lunch with a woman who's taking care of their special needs kid already and has her whole life wrapped up around this very ill child.
Isn't it interesting how we fall into that? And it's like, well, he just struggles to get up. He just can't. And I don't know what his issue is. His issue is that you're doing it for him, and he knows that he doesn't ever have to be better because you allow it. I say that with careful respect because I know that almost makes it sound like the victim is enabling it. And I hate to see ourselves in that way. I was doing it too.
Right.
I allowed him to treat me that way.
Because Lisa, you know what this person's going to do if she stops doing it, right?
Yeah. Blame her.
Yeah. He's going to miss and not go to work, possibly jeopardize that job that they need that health insurance in order to pay for that kid's care. You see how this is a domino.
And it'll be her fault. Yeah.
And it will be her fault. So when he doesn't get his little baby man ass up out of bed, it will be her fault for failure to set the right alarms for herself. And it will be her fault when they don't have the money to pay the doctor and the medical bills for this kid. Even though the whole thing was a setup. I think that's why even what you said a second ago, yeah, you're right. I don't like that, but you're right. But it doesn't feel that way. In these situations, they make it feel like it is us. Here's how it got ridiculous in mine. And this is why it didn't work because, yeah, guilt has worked before, but when the last relationship, it was so ridiculous that I kind of see through it. What was my fault that I had a friendship with somebody else that it was making him feel threatened, therefore he was cheating on me. And it was my fault that I couldn't just understand that this was an addiction he was battling with, which is why he kept having relapses. And I just needed to sort of accept and get on board whether or not I could live with a sex addict. So you see what I'm saying? He's sort of like putting it, and like to me, it's like, you know what, dude, I didn't make you do any of this. Plus, I'm also in my 50s, and I've been down this road enough with other people in my life that I'm now weary of it, and I'm not buying it. And remember, I raised 3 sons, and I've heard plenty of this with kids, so I'm not buying it there either. How are we growing out of this so people who are battling it can stop letting it be so powerful?
Well, I think one of the key things, and this is so easy to say, but to choose to really look at who is responsible for what. And I'm not talking about some team discussion here. This isn't a conversation to have with them if you're still in the toxic relationship, but with yourself. Who is really responsible for that? Like if I need to make a doctor's appointment or if I need to see a doctor, whose responsibility is my health? Yeah. The answer is me. And therefore, you can assume that conversely, he is responsible for himself. And so if it's on you to make his appointments, and even if it's a shift, right? Even if you've been doing this task, how can you sort of step back and say, you know what? I've got a lot on my plate. I would like you to be responsible for yourself. And this includes things like making your own appointments. If you can safely do that if you're still in the relationship. But it's really just about sort of assessing and looking at, am I doing things for people that are not my dependents that I don't need to be doing? If his health goes bad, that is literally his own consequence that affects him. Therefore, it's a reasonable assumption that he should be doing that task.
I agree. It takes us having to deconstruct this whole setup and challenge the assumptions that are being made. And they are ridiculous assumptions. We can't make people do or not do certain things. We are not responsible for the outcome of their complicated decisions, regardless of what they think. Here's another one I see too, is triangulation. This happens in my own family. I wish I had a better relationship with so-and-so. Like one of my kids may not be reaching out to a relative quite in the way this relative wishes. I'm not close to so-and-so. I really wish I had a better relationship with them. And I'm thinking, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not them and I'm not you. I don't know what effort you two are making, but I have nothing to do with that. I'm staying out of the middle of that. But I don't know how many times, because they're assuming that my connection to my own sons are going to make me feel guilty that my own sons don't have a better connection, that somehow I'm going to fix that connection to fix the feelings so I don't feel responsible. But it isn't me. Neither of these parties have anything to do with me. So I think part of it also is, just like you said, deconstruct it, look at where the responsibility really is, deconstruct it, and ask yourself if you have the ability to make these things happen. I mean, I'm not involved in that. That has nothing to do with me.
My father used to say this to me, and it was always in the context of work and leadership positions, but I'm realizing in this moment how much it applies to this. He always said, you cannot be accountable for something that you're not responsible for. So if I'm not responsible for your health or your relationship with somebody else, how can I be in charge of that? So you can't just decide that your wife has to make your doctor's appointments. If you miss doctor's appointments and your health goes south, guess what? That's on you. You're the one who's going to physically feel the effects of that. You're the one that's going to miss out on the relationship or whatever. But I do see a lot of people use that with women and their kids. The kids are going to hate me because of you. And the mother becomes responsible for the father's relationship with the kids. It's our job to facilitate that. And we feel guilty because we're like, oh, I really wish my kids had a better relationship with their dad. And I get that. I really do. But where is dad failing? It's not always gendered. I'm just talking in the context of this. But where is dad not stepping up where he could be? How are you responsible for a relationship between two people, none of which are you? Really hear that. So push back at what you are responsible for to try to keep that guilt at bay.
And see this instead as an expression of grief. So say that is your spouse, maybe your ex-spouse, saying, I wish I had a better relationship with the kids. And you're like knowing, well, you don't make an effort. And you've kind of disappeared on them. You fail to show up in critical pieces. I hear now that you stand back, look at all of this, and you wish it was different. You wish you're closer. You wish they felt closer to you. Yes, you would like me to fix it for you. I can't fix it. That's the truth. I can't fix it. I then can sit with this with you and feel bad about it. I can sit here and feel grief with you about this. That's what I do. I move to grief instead of guilt. Like, yeah, it is really sad. It's sad that this is the state of things.
I don't know if people even realize how profound what you just said is. That something just clicked even for me right now in this idea that we always talk about the way we show empathy to this type of person, right? Empathy without obligation is my sort of thing. I can feel bad that you don't have that relationship or that you can't get yourself to the doctor. I feel bad, but that's where that ends. I feel with you and I'm not going to take any action. But see, this is where I think more guilt can come into play, is that you could. But what I want to sort of reinforce here is that it's never going to have a good enough outcome, because you facilitating a relationship means that relationship is never really genuine and authentic. You making his doctor's appointments means that if you ever get hit by a bus, he doesn't even know who his doctor is. He doesn't even know how to get there. You can't be that. You can't baby an adult. They need to be an adult. And the more we enable that by just letting that be what we do in the relationship, where we fill that role. And I know why. I mean, there's a million reasons. It's not just guilt. Sometimes you get punished or there's other negative consequences. But we need to be able to step back. And I almost wonder, it's a little sarcastic, I don't know how well this would work on a narcissist, but sort of like, I have faith that you know how to make your own doctor's appointments.
Yeah, well, I do something like that. Similar to that, I say, I trust you're going to work this out. I think that's sort of a good way to say it. It's like, I think that's really difficult. I trust you'll work this out. You have to be connected to your empathy in that moment. Like, yeah, I know it's not good, but I also know that you're a smart person and you know different angles. And I've seen you be resourceful before. You'll be resourceful here.
I'm sure you'll solve this, without the sarcasm. Maybe they like that. As a narcissist, blow a little smoke, right?
What I did, though, is I positioned myself as, I see the invitation to step in, but I'm not taking the invitation. I'm just like, yeah, I see that, but I know you've got it. You're good at this stuff.
if they directly ask you for something like that, like you push back and like, I know you can make your own appointment, or I know you can handle that situation, and they push back and say like, but I need you to do it for me, I would still push back a little bit. Like, you don't need me to. Or I would sometimes say like, yeah, I'll get to that tomorrow, knowing that he needed it done today, so that the urgency would make him do it himself. Might sound like a little bit of a game, but at least I was winning at the end anyway. In the beginning, I wasn't. In the beginning, I was doing it all, but there came a point, like we were already split up and he was still like, make my appointment and go get my medication, and can you run around and can you do this? And I remember being on the phone with his mother at one point, and I was like, you know what? You do it. I'm done with this. I'm sick of running around. And she literally drove to my house 40 minutes away to pick up something and then drive it to him 5 minutes away. I was absolutely unwilling at that point.
I would say just something like this. No, that's not going to work.
Nice and direct.
No, it's not going to work. I mean, well, but why? It's just not. But how come? You can do it. No, it's not going to work.
I was talking to a client today about you and how you tell people to just be a parrot, just repeat, just say it again. Nah, it's not going to work. Why not? It's not. But why? It's not going to work. It's so annoying, but like,
yeah,
it's effective.
It's effective because of pattern interruption. That's what's happening here.
Ooh.
Right? They know there is a pattern of way that you two dialogue, and that normally in the past it would have worked. You did that. You'd be like, okay, sure, yeah, I'll do that, right? That's the pattern. So when you just parrot back and don't change it, that's the other key. Don't change it. Don't change it. Parrot back and hold. You've interrupted the pattern and they're thrown. And by the third or fourth time, they don't know what you've literally like they're like, doesn't compute. And you shut the whole system down.
Error message.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's why it works. It's a pattern interruption. I want to talk another one, and it happened between you and I. It happened last week, and it was powerful, and I loved what you did. And I didn't mean to guilt you, but it was an emotional hook, is that I am hyper independent. I know that I am. I don't know how to ask for help. I can't even see that I don't know how to ask for help. I can't see it. When it's happening, I'm like just overwhelmed. And so inadvertently, because of my upbringing and my family background, what we do is we guilt and ask for people to become mind readers to fix the problems for us that we're not fixing. So I did that. I just sent a message out, and that was like, please stop overwhelming me. You're overwhelming me. So you should know you're overwhelming me and just stop doing it. And I love what you did. You said, I don't know how to respond to this. There's no real good response to this. See, that was enough of the pattern interruption for me to say, oh, crap. And I was able to say, oh, I'm really sorry. I don't know how. I'm struggling to know how. I'm melting down right now. Then suddenly what happened between the group of us, because we have a company, so the group of us started saying, what if we did this? What if we did this? And I even suddenly started having ideas. What if we did this? And then I started feeling better. But that's another thing, is sometimes guilt is used for an individual to say, I don't know what more to do, so I want you to fix it for me. And then we put it out to the person to sort of say, it's your job because I internally can't fix this, or I don't see how to fix it. And I think that's where I get really stuck, because I feel bad. When that happens, I feel bad for the other person, and I want to fix it for them. You know, I think if you did that, I would have like, oh, okay, I'll try to mind read for you, because I'm just so used to sort of doing that for other people. But I love how you're like, you know what, that's not really mine. I can't get into your head, Kerry, and I can't know when this is going wrong or bad for you.
But if you say it, you can identify it, then we can brainstorm. I feel like in my abusive relationship, it was always like he had a problem, and it was immediately like, well, I don't want to own that problem, so I'm just going to put it on her. And then I owned his problems. I owned our problems. I owned my problems. If he was abusive, that was also my problem. And everything was on me. And I was like, okay, well, I'm a good problem solver. And he would reinforce that, right?
Yeah.
You're good at solving problems. You're good at stuff like this. You're good with solutions. Yeah, you mean I'm good with taking on everything and being the person you can just dogpile all the problems onto. But actually, abuse is an unsolvable problem in the context of staying. I mean, the solution is leaving. But when someone's repeatedly guilting you and there's a pattern, an ongoing pattern, and you've identified it and you're calling it out and you're recognizing it and they're continuing to do it, that's abuse.
Yeah, it is. But we get called codependent because we get asked by these individuals to be mind readers, to fix problems, to jump into things that are not our problem. We don't even know that we're doing it. You know how I feel about the word codependent. I hate the word. It's a fuzzy word. There's no definition for it. But I think it's really unfair that just blame victims for responding to somebody else's output for help, because we're wired. Again, think about this from an evolutionary standpoint. The only reason humans live is because we've learned to get into the head of others and to anticipate where they may not survive if we don't intervene. So when someone does this, it's really compelling. The hard part is learning as we move into adulthood that other adults need to do this for themselves around everything. Now, will we perfectly get there? No, we won't. And people are like, what do you mean everything? I mean, literally, like, if I have a bad day, it's my job to reassure and soothe myself. If I'm, like in last week, overloaded and taking on too much, it's my job to figure out how to reduce that and invite more people to literally take on more things instead of asking them to fix it for me. But toxic people will do this for back to control. You and I have talked a lot about control. It is for them, first of all, they don't want responsibility. They're not going to take responsibility. So it's everybody else's fault, and especially yours. But it also is a way for them then not to have to deal with the accountability and responsibility of the things that they don't then do. They don't take care of their health. They don't take care of their relationships. They don't take care of that work relationship. And so they look around and say, oh, it's the whole world around me fault that I'm falling apart. And unfortunately, it takes hard work for us to recognize that this is not our job, and nor should we take it on. And just because we feel bad, that's back to where I say, recognize the bad feeling as grief, not as responsibility.
That's so important, I don't think we can ever really be like fully responsible for another human unless there are dependents, literally. And even then, as they get older, like, come on, step it up. When I would make his doctor's appointments, I would then put a calendar invitation and I would keep it in my calendar and his calendar so that I knew, he knew. And if he missed the appointment, which was shockingly regular, it was my job to remind him. And I'm like, but I put it in your calendar. It's not enough. You should have reminded me this morning. You should have made sure I was awake. I'm like, but the appointment was at 3:30 p.m. What do you mean awake? So to me, it's like, you're wrong. You're going to be wrong. It's a double bind on purpose to make you feel guilty, because guilt works, because it will keep you working for them. And it keeps them from ever having to take exactly what you're talking about, accountability.
So in the podcast extra today, and I know we're going to jump over to fan mail first, but a podcast extra, let's talk about how to recognize guilt, because we often don't recognize it when it's happening. And you and I are both trying to unpack that faster so that we recognize it, so we can talk about how to break it down and see it better. But one of the fan mail questions that we get a lot is about the podcast extra. And I realize that this is probably my autistic brain, that I don't really explain things super, super well, but I should sort of assume it's really natural. So I want to address that question. We create an extra interview that is exclusive. We do never release it publicly. It's only released a couple places. So the way to get a hold of the interview is by either becoming a subscriber on your YouTube channel or my YouTube channel, and then you'll get access to that playlist, or by signing up with a Substack newsletter, and it's embedded in the newsletter, which goes out every week. Now, I know that doesn't make sense to people because but it's a newsletter, so where's the video? Well, it's inside the newsletter. But in order to answer for that question, Substack has done something really amazing. They're now creating a podcast/video way to post them. It's being dual posted every week. It's posted individually as just a standalone video. So if you don't want the newsletter, read all the rest, which I don't know why, because we pack it full of great stuff. But if you don't want to find it in the newsletter, you can now go to the separate video that's just posted separately on its own. And I've done a third thing. I've also created just a master playlist that's listed in Substack. Here's the playlist of the videos so that you can go and see all of them all in one spot. So there's lots of ways to find it these days. But yeah, that's what people don't understand, is that extra interview is on Substack. And maybe people don't know what Substack is, but it's another platform as a way to sort of like I don't know, how would you describe Substack? Do you know what it is? Do you have a sense of it?
No, I just roll with it.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain because it's trying to be everything these days. But it used to be just a writing platform where writers would go and write their own letter. But instead of sending it out by their own email, they would send it out through Substack. But these days, it's kind of become a one-stop place for people to offer exclusive content. So kind of see it maybe as a slash between a blog, website, and Patreon, I think is maybe one way to sort of see it.
Yeah. And so tell me, why should people sign up for the podcast extra? Like, generally speaking, what's the extra? What are we offering people?
So what you get is you get these exclusive interviews, and now there's like over 25 of them, and we add one every week. So you get interviews with like Dr. Lester. So things that he didn't say in a podcast, you won't hear him. It's things that we've asked him directly alone on this exclusive interview. It's an exclusive interview that is not public. So you get that. But you also, in the newsletter, you get practical tips on how to. I often include questionnaires, things to ask, to consider, resources, more resources on the same topic. So if you'd like to go to a deeper dive, you can also find things to look for, warning signs. I mean, all sorts of these really helpful how-tos, but also what to watch out for, more sophisticated strategies, just everything around each of the weekly topics is all in this letter.
I notice a lot of practical solutions. Like we end up sort of like, okay, so like, how do you fix this now?
Yeah.
And I think that's really key. You're unpacking a topic. Okay, now what? Podcast extra.
And there's also sometimes, I know that we had one just came out last week, where we had this interview with Dr. Nadine Macaluso. She's the ex-wife of the Wolf of Wall Street. And in that podcast extra, we actually asked her about the movie. Now, we didn't talk about that in the interview, but we went and said, okay, now let's talk about what that was like to be the feature of this movie. All right, this is really great. We're going to jump over now in a podcast extra and talked about how to recognize guilt. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Find me at Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. And whether you're in, consider leaving, or have left a narcissistic relationship, find community support at my Toxic Free Relationship Club. You can learn about this resource as well as others at kerrymcavoyphd.com. Now you don't need to wait a week to get your next podcast fix. Join Breaking Free from Narc Abuse at substack.com to get exclusive audio content for subscribers. To sign up, click the link in the show notes. And I'll see you back here next week.